Welcome back to the VideoETA Interview series. Today I'm your host, John Couture. Of course, I'm that every day, but today I'm welcoming in the wonderfully talented actor, iPhone app inventor, and recently co-writer of the new movie Group Sex, Greg Grunberg. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, John?
I'm doing excellent. I mentioned co-writer. This is your first Group Sex is a new project. You're not only starring in, but it's the first chance you had to write your own work. How was that, and how is that different from acting in somebody else's creations?
Well, it's what's interesting is I'm like, I try to be one of those kind of guys that, like, if I have an idea, I go crazy with it. I mean, like, I won't just let it sit and say, I've got about 16 ideas that I want to. This one is one of those that I just knew would be really funny. It was an area that no one had really tackled before. And, sexaholics, people really think, okay, so keep it in your pants, zip it up. It's not that easy. And the 12-step program is one that we tried to respect or whatever. But my buddy Larry Trilling and I, we wrote this together. And then years went by, and I just was determined to make it happen. And luckily we got funding and we made it happen. When you write something for yourself, like, I didn't know what part I was going to play. I was like, well, do I play Andy? And then, I saw myself just playing Jerry. I mean, that's the role that I wanted to play. This guy who is, basically has a problem. He's a sexaholic himself, and he doesn't know it until his friend, has, unfortunately or fortunately slips into a sexaholic group. Right. But when you do that, it's the first time that I've ever gone, okay, let's like pull back and do a rewrite on Jerry and beef him up a little bit, Right. And why not? I mean, I was playing the role and I really wanted to find these great moments. And then also Larry directed it, and he's such a great director. He's running Parenthood right now. He directs most of those episodes of that TV show, and I've worked with him for years. He's really brilliant. I mean, he just knows the best use of the camera during comedy and how to get the best performances out of people. And along those lines, we did a lot of kind of just riffing on the day. And he's the one, when I act, there's one audience member. The crew can't laugh. I can see them kind of twitching and reacting to funny stuff. But basically, if the director likes it, that's my audience, and I have to trust that person. And I completely trust Larry, and he and I just really loved this process together. We had such a great experience making this movie, man. It was so funny. Some unbelievable people we got to work with. Lisa Lampanelli, Tom Arnold, one guy that I've always wanted to work with. My whole career, I've had like this very short list of people that I want to work with, and Henry Winkler is at the top of the list, and I got to do that in a way that, I hope I'll be able to do again. We've become very good friends, and he's incredible. And Kim Whitley and Josh Cook and Odette Usman, and I mean, the list goes. Rob Benedict, unbelievable. Like, just really funny people.
Wow, you're a great interview. You've answered all my questions in one answer. Actually, talking about Henry Winkler, I think he was great in the movie. He was really inspired casting. How did that come about? How did you get him? How did you get the Fonz involved in Group Sex?
Well, I auditioned for a TV show called Monty years ago, and it basically came down to me and a couple other guys, and one of those other guys was David Schwimmer, who also has become a friend. But at that time, he wasn't a friend; he was a foe. He was my arch nemesis at that time. That was before Friends and everything. And Monty was Henry Winkler was starring in the sitcom, and they were looking for someone to play his son. Mm-hmm. And Schwimmer got the role. I didn't. But in that process, in the audition process, the last audition I had with him, the callback, was, I think Henry produced that show too, but was Henry went toe to toe with me. Like we stopped the lines. We finished the scene, and he kept going, and it was like, what? Am I about to improv with the Fonz?
That's awesome.
And people in the business know, and people outside the business know this too, because you can't help but get a sense of this. Mm-hmm. He's the kindest, sweetest, most talented and prepared guy you will ever run into, ever, in or out of the business. Like, he's just exactly who you see. Plus, he can get real. He's a really, really great actor, but he's also just so genuinely sincere and real when you perform with him, that if there was any phoniness to your performance, it sticks out so much. You'd never be able to do it. He's just that good. And, and now I'm lucky enough to call him a friend. It's been an incredible process. That alone is worth doing a movie like this, is to get to work with a guy like that.
That's awesome. Now, group sex is not your traditional comedy that you find out there in the megaplexes today. I mean, let's be honest. It's more of an R-rated, raunchy comedy. It kind of draws me back to my childhood, the 80s. The Porky's and the Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah.
Where did you draw the inspiration for this type of movie, going counterculture to what's out there now? And also, what were some of your influences when you're in the writing process?
Well, there were a few articles and there were a few things going on at that time. This was years ago. This was like 7 years ago. And they were just, it wasn't pervasive. It wasn't everywhere. There was something that, there are two things that I think you can laugh at. One is overeating and, that sort of, that addiction to food, and also sexaholics. I think those are the two things that people traditionally think that are so easy. Like, put the donut down and don't touch it and eat fruit. It's not that easy. I go through that all the time, right. and it's an addiction, a true addiction.
Join the club, sir.
What's that?
Join the club.
It's the Twinkie syndrome. And then you've got sex, which you think is so easy, and then that's also an addiction. And so I went to 6 sexaholics meetings, but we wrote the script and then it sat for years. And until when we got the financing for it, all of a sudden there were look at Tiger Woods and look at all these people now that are addicted to sex. Bill Clinton, there were all these people that came out where it was like, wow, this is really a problem. This is a major problem that is not something it may not affect you directly, but now we're hearing about people that we look up to. At that time it was like Kobe Bryant, like all these people came out. It was like, what? So it was perfect timing. Plus, Judd Apatow was doing, it wasn't really so counterculture to what was being made, because the Judd Apatow comedies were out and they were doing really well. And so the financiers, our producers, they kind of said, this is something we'd like to do. Is there kind of a raunchier kind of comedy? However, when you watch the movie, Larry Trilling, who I co-wrote and he directed and produced it with me, he really wanted to stay true to kind of like that Billy Wilder comedy, like The Apartment,
where
a guy gets in over his head. I mean, he has no intention of going to a sexaholic meeting. And he finds himself in there with Henry Winkler and Odette. He follows a girl. That's the whole thing. He follows a girl that he wants, that he thinks is just absolutely so beautiful, sees her sing in a club, and his life turns upside down. And of course, he's being nudged by his buddy, who's like, "Hey, what are you kidding me? This is awesome!"
Yes.
And I loved playing that role.
Absolutely.
But the performance is truly like Lombardo Boyar. I mean, he is so funny in this movie, and Rob Benedict and Tom Arnold. Let's talk about Tom Arnold for a second. Tom is one of those guys where forget the words on the page, because he's going to hit them and he's going to give you exactly what you wrote, because he's pro. But he brings so much life and so much energy to a role, and he brings out things that you never, and they're organic things. They're really natural to the character. He jumps out of this movie. I mean, he's awesome. And that was another guy that was so lucky to be able to work with. And that came through a relationship that Larry Trilling's sister is one of the top wardrobe artists and stylists, and she knew Tom, so we had lunch with him and we all clicked, and he's cool. Movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've mentioned Tom and you mentioned the wonderful cast many times, and I know you've worked with Larry in the past, the director. And you mentioned a little bit about the improv that went on, so I assume that not everything that we see in the final film was as you wrote it. Give me maybe your one or two favorite scenes that came out of the improv process that made the final cut that when you go back and watch, you just laugh out loud every time.
Well, a lot of the reactions are, the group is an area, when you get in that group, you're sitting there and you've got some static shots, and like the camera's on Henry, and and Rob is or Josh is telling the story, and he's making up a story, because the only way he can survive in this group, and the only way they'll let him out, is if he confesses and tells them this story about how he's this wild sex addict. So he's making up this crazy story, and it's getting everybody going. And Henry Winkler is like, yes, oh, yes. I mean, we didn't write that.
That's awesome.
There are moments like that just make this so rich. Another example is Rob Benedict is telling the story about how he's a chronic masturbator and he can't stop. And sitting next to him, Tom Arnold is like jabbing these comments in and getting himself going. He's like, oh, yeah, that's my favorite part. Oh, I love it. I mean, those are moments that, you know, those actors, they're in the moment. They're there. And you know, it's comedy. So you really kind of, you have to cast people that that you trust and can do that kind of thing to bring it to life. Because, you know, like, I don't know, I can't see you right now. We're in an interview. But if you had a smile on your face, I mean, that wouldn't be written in a script. People don't sit static waiting for their next line in real life. And you want actors to keep it alive. And these guys did much more than that. They added so much to it. Every Catherine Narducci is an amazing actress. She's in this, you know, all of us, Kim Whitley. There's a scene with Kim Whitley where she loses her celibacy and it kind of really just takes it out on Josh Cook. Yeah. She's been celibate for 100 days and finally her fuse just is lit and she just goes nuts. And she's got Josh on the bed and, you know, there's fudge and we just said, you know, she goes crazy with condiments all over him, you know, dessert, food all over him. Mm-hmm. And she did this whole thing where she was like, oh yeah. And she put it on her face like she was a football player. And, you know, you need to have comedy chops to be able to do that stuff. And everybody in the movie had it.
That's awesome. And you're right. I mean, the cast is wonderful. It works great together and you really need to keep it dynamic.